Okay, welcome everybody to another edition of Legal Tech Week. It's September 9th, 2022. This is the show in which we talk about the top stories in legal tech and innovation for the week. And I guess it being Labor Day week, it wasn't a very busy week overall, but there's a few things to talk about, including at least one acquisition that I think I almost flew under the radar because it was announced on Labor Day. But a few other things as well. I am Bob Ambrogi. I have the blog Law Sites and the podcast Law Next and the Legal Tech Directory Law Next, which you can find at directory.lawnext.com. And our smallish panel today, as you see arrayed before you, we've got Nikki. You're back. You haven't. You're black. Your Nikki Black is back after having not been with us for a few shows. But welcome back. Tell us about yourself.
I am Nikki Black. I'm the legal technology evangelist at My Case Law Practice Management Software. I write legal technology columns for Above the Law, ABA Journal, the Daily Record, and I also I write the legal industry report for My Case and LawPay, and also some My Case benchmark reports that I've been drafting this year too. So I also create some stuff there as well. But basically I like to write and talk about the intersection of law and tech and help lawyers understand how to use technology more effectively and encourage them to do so.
And another legal technology evangelist, Steve Embry.
Hey, Steve Embry. I write the blog Tech Law Crossroads, which is also at the crossroads or intersection between technology and law and other things. I also am the chair of the ABA Law Practice Division. We have about 25,000 members and lots of content. So we certainly got to put that plug in there. I'm glad to be back this week. I was gone last week.
And last but not least, Joe.
Joe Patrice from Above the Law and Thinking Like a Lawyer. I'm more of I guess they're tech evangelists. I'm more of a tech apostate. So we're here to chat anyway.
Great. Yeah, Steve, speaking of the ABA, we did get the go-ahead this week in terms of Tech Show that we will have the Startup Alley once again at Tech Show, which I'm glad to hear. And maybe
Good.
Even bigger and better this year. They're possibly talking about even getting a bigger room for it than we've had in the past. So that will be exciting, I hope.
Yep.
Looking forward to that. We're going to start making some announcements around that coming up pretty soon. We did that last week. We did our sort of ILTA post-mortem show with a bunch of us, but Steve and Nikki, you were both not here last week. And I wondered maybe we should just kind of start getting your thoughts on that because we didn't get a chance to hear from you last week. Steve, you were there. You went to quite a few programs. Saw you around. What was your takeaway?
I thought you were going to say I went to quite a few parties, which I did.
That too. I only know because I saw you there.
I thought it was a good conference. I did a post on it. A few glitches here and there, which we've all sort of talked about and chatted about. I'm sure you guys talked about it last week. But one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting about it is a lot more integrations seem to be going on in the industry. Microsoft has kind of emerged as a silent partner, maybe. I don't know if that's the way to describe it. They weren't obviously there in person, but it seemed like everybody you talked to was doing something with Microsoft. And I was kind of thinking that, I think Joe and I talked to David Carnes, and I remember him talking about the maturing of the industry. And one of the takeaways I had is it seemed, when a few years ago, you would have two dissatisfied lawyers at a big law firm trying to figure out how to do research in the middle of the night, and one of them said, let's build a better tool to do this with, and they sprouted Fastcase. And there was a lot of that, and now it seems like there's more venture capital money, there's more integrations, there's more size, and I sort of wonder what's going to happen to the industry? Is it a good thing, a bad thing? Are we losing some of that sort of hands-on lawyering entrepreneurship that used to start all these companies? It seemed like, for better or worse. But that was just an impression I had. It seemed like there was more of that going on. I don't know if that's something you guys noticed, but I had a good time. The parties were really good. most of the sessions were good. I didn't get COVID. I didn't get any free lunches, but neither did any of us, for that matter. So, but no, it was a good
Oh, I
conference.
got a free lunch at what, Joe, I think you were there too, at the one on the
Yep.
like floor
yeah.
planning for law firms or something.
Maptician, yep.
Maptician,
the
that's what it
Maptician
was.
event.
Which
I
is
had
actually
no
kind of a
about that.
cool
It
event.
was, yeah.
I did have a little dispute with Jeff Brandt because I said something about at least the food I had at the receptions was pretty good, and he immediately slapped my hand and said, "No, you dumbass, it was terrible. I don't know what kind of taste you have, but it was really awful." But
Yeah.
I thought it for a reception, a conference reception, it wasn't too bad. But maybe that's because I had too much to drink by that point. I don't know.
He was just grouchy because he was wearing a boot all week. What are you going to say? He's just. But actually, I thought the observation you just made about Microsoft is interesting, because I don't know if any of you would remember this, but I mean, a few years ago, Microsoft had this whole kind of division devoted to the legal industry and to promoting Office in the legal industry, and to building out other products around security and compliance for the legal industry, and that kind of died out in a way. But at the same time, more. It's not that Microsoft gave up on the legal industry by any means, but more and more of these, as you say, other companies have been sort of piggybacking in a way on Office in interesting ways that make Office, in and of itself, a sort of a viable practice management platform. I mean, Law Toolbox is one good example that we've all talked to, I'm sure, but they kind of have made an art of attaching themselves to Office in a way that really cleverly integrates their court calendaring application with Office calendar and Teams and email and all of that, so that you can really effectively manage and calendar and all of that matters right within Office, and almost getting and all your document storage, of course, is there, and so it is an interesting trend. Maybe it's a little bit of a, if you can't beat them, join them. I mean, it's Microsoft Office is ubiquitous in law offices, and why not ride that? But Nikki, what about you? You were there less time than some of us, but
Yeah, I was there a little less time. My daughter was supposed to go to college on the 23rd as a freshman. I didn't want to miss that, and then she ended up entering signing up for an orientation program that got her there earlier. So I probably could have been there for longer, but oh well. But I thought that I think the Microsoft thing is actually really interesting, because one of the companies that I talked to was and that I wrote about, Peppermint, was it's a CRM, but they sort of, their home base is inside of Microsoft Outlook, and that's sort of what they hold out as distinguishing themselves from the other CRMs. So it does a lot of what and it's interesting to me, the reason they did that is because lawyers spend all their time in there, a lot of time in that ecosystem and in Microsoft and in their email, and so the CRM is included in there. So like it provides you with all this additional insight on the people you're emailing with, for example. And there's add-ons you can add to Gmail that will do the same thing, not legal specific, but so I thought it was interesting that that's really how they set themselves apart and how they built their software out from the get-go. And I think it is indicative of that trend. I mean, law firms are not going to leave that ecosystem, especially the larger the law firm you get into. The smaller ones may be in G Suites, but more often than not, the larger firms are in Microsoft and in that ecosystem. So I think that's definitely a trend. And I think that's, if you're targeting that market, you're going to have to figure out how to operate within that ecosystem and integrate with it. The other things I noticed were the integrations, but the way I've coined it was APIs, just APIs all over the place. everyone's, and some of the most interesting ones, I think I've written about this quite a few times, but I love what Lexis is doing. You know, LexisNexis has this, they're making dynamic the law firm's documents dynamic by having all these hyperlinks. They're almost like, it reminds me of like web pages back in the day when the internet first rolled online. You know, it's these dynamic, they add links to the firm's internal data and documents that take you back to Lexis and their databases and give you additional information about whatever just happens to be in the firm's documents. And I thought that was particularly interesting. And then these APIs where other companies can either provide additional data on top of what Lexis would provide, or just provide some interesting way of leveraging that concept. So I thought it was super interesting to see the follow-up on how that's actually coming to fruition after they'd announced that concept a couple of years ago. And so that, but for me, really what stood out though was just APIs and integrations and everyone trying to be the home base or the platform from which a law firm operates. And, you know, this is where you are and you spring forth from that platform into every other platform. And, you know, I think that ties into what you just suggested, which, you know, they already have a platform that they're all in and everyone's trying to boot Microsoft out of the way. And I don't know if that's going to work or how that the dust is going to settle, but it's interesting to see it sort of, I don't know if explodes the word, but, you know, transition at this point.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We all saw sort of the same things. I mean, in my post about it, I kind of wrote about some of the same things too, and the idea of platform fatigue, which you know, explains the popularity of using Office as something to tack yourself onto, because if the lawyers are already there, then they don't have to keep jumping out of there to do other things. And I also wrote about the sort of the ideas of, you know, the APIs as a theme and integrations. The other theme maybe that came out of it, Joe and I were on a webinar earlier this week, our sort of our final say, I think, on ILTACon maybe, talking about another theme that we saw there, which was these sort of disconnects. And it wasn't so much the theme of some of the, you know, the speakers or the presenters as much as more what we were kind of hearing among the rank and file there in the exhibit hall and wandering around the conference. Joe, did you want to talk about that a little bit? I mean,
yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. So we did this webinar. I'm sure we will be posting it on Above the Law somewhere if we haven't already. I'll figure that out, everybody. Yeah, no, I'm frazzled. Anyway, yeah, so we talked about disconnects, and this was a theme that we kind of came up with partially from talking to people in exhibit halls and what we were hearing, but also just our own insights. Like, why is it some of the best stuff we hear, the great ideas that we hear, don't get picked up, don't get adopted in the ways we think they will? And we decided that it's because fundamentally, in multiple different ways, there's a break that exists between one stakeholder and another, and there just isn't enough happening to bridge those gaps. Things like generational is obviously one, but we also talked about law firms and legal departments being on separate pages. We talked about the IT groups and the lawyers who are the end users not having the ability to, you know, one of the things I said repeatedly on that show was that the IT folks are actually doing a magnificent job, frankly, of basically guessing in the dark or quasi-dark about what a lawyer might actually want and then adopt, because they probably aren't getting a ton of FaceTime with a lawyer explaining exactly what they want. So with some vague clues, they're going out and getting things and hoping that the lawyers will adopt it. It was interesting. And those are just a few of the gaps that we identified that are keeping things from happening.
You know, one of the things that I probably mentioned in my post on the ILTACon, I know I've mentioned it before because it's a constant sort of fascination, and that is that when you look at these legal conferences, legal tech conferences, excluding the ABA Tech Show, which is a little bit different because it's smaller law firms, but the number of lawyers, practicing lawyers, which actually show up is really small. And so to your point, Joe, what happens is you get IT people who come and get jazzed up and see all these things, and then they have to go back and try to explain it to somebody that doesn't want to have the time or inclination to listen and doesn't understand what they're saying very well. And, sometimes the vendors don't make it real clear in simple language that the IT folks can use to explain to the lawyers that really don't understand what's going on. And so you do have this disconnect. And I don't know that that's going to change, because I don't see a lot of lawyers other than, small firm lawyers that frequently go to Tech Show, which is one of the things that makes it kind of an interesting and good show. But I don't see that changing. It's kind of across the board. They just don't go. And in fact, when I was in a law firm, I went to Clock one year, and had a lot of trouble getting my expenses paid by the law firm. And then I'm looking at who's actually there on the client side. I'm going, wait a minute, there's all these great clients here and very few lawyers. Well, what is wrong here?
Yeah, like I kind of analogized it to that. It's kind of like that the allegory of Plato's cave kind of situation, where you've got the IT folks go out and see and talk to these vendors and see these great products, and then they have to go back and explain them to people who have no comprehension of what they would look like, and that's a hard job. And frankly, as bad as legal tech adoption is as a general matter, the thing that we always complain about, frankly, I'm kind of impressed it's as good as it is, all things considered.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing we were talking about in this panel is, not just that disconnect, which you're absolutely right. A lot of the IT people go, the lawyers don't go. Legal Week might be a little different. I mean, you might get a few more lawyers at Legal Week in New York, but you still get a lot of IT people. ILTA's probably the worst or the best in terms of a lot of IT people and few lawyers at ILTA. But I think a lot of the IT people can kind of get all excited about products that they see that maybe aren't necessarily even the right fit for some of the lawyers in their firm. I mean, they get more, the shiny new things kind of syndrome. They see things that are really cool and technically cool, but if they were really in having a really open dialogue with some of the lawyers in their firm, they may realize that maybe this doesn't solve or fit within the workflow of the lawyers. I mean, I think part of the disconnect is not just that lawyers aren't at these tech shows, but the IT people don't really always know what it is the lawyers really need or what they want. Right. And I guess the other point is sometimes the lawyers don't know either, but they're not connected enough to sort of understand the workflows and all of that that can help bridge that communication issue.
Well, and that's,
go ahead, Nikki. I'm sorry. No, well, I was just going to say the other problem, of course, is that the IT folks and the vendors sometimes sort of forget the business model of the lawyers, and that is bill by the hour. So every hour they have to spend trying to figure out how to use a piece of technology is, so much money down the drain, so to speak. So ease of use, and for a dummied down lawyer is pretty important in terms of implementing the technology in the firm. And, IT folks and vendors sometimes sort of get lost in this. Well, it's easy for me to use. I don't have to click here, click here, and click here, and click there. But they forget that if I have to click twice and I'm trying to, do two different things, get a brief out the door and have 5 conference calls, I'm not going to click more than twice. That's it. I'm done. Yeah.
Right.
So that's yet another disconnect.
well,
And I
that's why,
apologize, Nikki, I interrupted you.
oh, that's all right. Arguably I interrupted you, so we mutually interrupted. But I think it kind of highlights one of the challenges overall, which is I've lost my thought because of the mutual interrupting. It's this idea that law firms need to be run like businesses, and they're not run like businesses. They're run by lawyers who don't understand business, and so or don't care to understand business. So because that happens, you don't, to purchase software and make use of it, you need to actually have someone research it, understand it, have influence over the decision, and then be able to roll it out and require training, and value the training time as something that's important, that's mandatory, that everyone has to go to, so that you can actually realize the benefit of the investment that's been made into the software. But what often happens is because law firms are not run like businesses, because it's lawyers at the top creating committees, and taking input, but not really listening or valuing the input oftentimes, and I'm generalizing, and then just sometimes it just seems like they randomly pick and choose what sounds like it's good. They don't roll it out, they just make it available. And so what happens is what happened to a firm I talked to a bunch of years ago, where the office manager, when I'd mentioned, the benefits of time tracking, it was someone who'd asked me to come in and talk about something else. They wanted me to do a cloud presentation, but I talked to the office manager afterwards, and she's like, well, yeah, the time tracking thing, we invested in the software and we have it available and the lawyers just never use it. So they don't actually, I think it was Belfield, how it interfaced with the law firm's server-based billing and time tracking software. And they purchased it and they rolled it out and no one used it because I don't think the lawyers even knew it was there or how to use it or the benefits. And so that was just it absolutely would have been valuable and saved the firm time and actually earned the money back 100% based upon just data I pulled from my case on this. When you have passive time tracking or just the ability to capture time as you go, you capture so much more time that the software pays for itself. But in that case, it just went to waste because it hadn't been rolled out. There wasn't any training. And so the value was never realized. And I think it's because lawyers just don't run their firms like the businesses the way that they ought to as businesses. And they are businesses. And they spend a lot of time spinning their wheels because they're not running them properly.
One thing that, and I put this on our pre-show thing, but this is a good place to stick it in here. One revelation I had, I'd taken this off of your point about making the money back with tech, because we talk about that a lot, that, yes, it's an outlay, but you actually get it back. Yes, it's going to make you reduce your billable hours, but it means you can work on other things. All of that sort of rhetoric we use a lot. One revelation I had in real time, like I had not pre-thought it, but like in the middle of this webinar that Bob and I are talking about, I had a revelation that is that necessarily true in the way in which law firms are structured? Given the way law firms are structured, and I think, Steve, you might be able to talk to this a little bit too, because you've talked a lot about origination credit in the past. If I'm you say, oh, well, you don't, you're more efficient, your billable hours have gone down, you're getting things done faster, but that means you can go out and get a new client. And, that's kind of an ideal of a partner's position that isn't always true. If I'm one of those people who has a very problematic and demanding client who requires me to be 80% of their attention at all time, or else they'll go somewhere else, and that represents my $2 million book that I bring to the table, I make that more efficient. It's not like I can go out and magically get another client. I also can't get a new client who takes up any more of my time because this first one requires me to be there 80% of the time. Now all of a sudden I'm only getting $1 million out of it. And we always assume, oh, you'll be able to go off and do other things, but some client relationships and books just won't let you do that. And now in the ideal world of worlds, the law firm would respect that fact, and you make less, but you've brought this good long-standing client, yada. But that's just not how a lot of these places work.
No, that's the one time we decide to run ourselves like a business, right? You don't produce, you don't get as much money. That's just the end of the discussion. But no, you're right. And the whole industry went through this period when I was a younger lawyer, where they would be hiring more and more and more associates, and every class was huge, and it came to the point where many of these associates became partners or non-equity partners, if you will, and but there wasn't necessarily enough work to keep all of them busy. And then you have superimposed what most firms do, and that is put quotas, billable hour quotas or revenue quotas on lawyers. And now, if there's not enough work to do, then you're it's a double whammy, right? You be more efficient, you have less hours, but there's nothing else to fill the bucket with. It's too hard to go find anything else to fill the bucket. And so because of that, lawyers have been a lot of lawyers historically slow to be more efficient. And it's not necessarily an aversion to technology, because when you look at the business side of it, collections, revenue, those sorts of things, most lawyers aren't opposed to that. But when you start talking about automation that will replace hours, then, well, we have to think about that one a little more carefully. And the other thing I was thinking when you were talking, Nikki, and I don't want to prolong this discussion, but part of it with the structure of the law firms where you have partners who have an ownership stake in the firm, and then you have all these other people, IT people, who have no ownership stake in the firm. That sort of lends itself to this, I don't want to say mistrust, but a lack of respect, maybe a little bit. I mean, I can remember a partner in my firm who, was asked to provide, comply with some sort of expense recording for business development expenses. And he was, I don't have to do that shit. You work for me. And so there's this kind of attitude, and it caused in part by only lawyers can be partners in law firms. So an IT CIO or COO of a law firm will never have an ownership stake, will never have an ownership seat at the table, irrespective of what they're paid. And that ownership stake becomes important, right? Because now you're partially responsible for the productivity of the business in a very direct way. So it's just a compounding series of problems, I think, that lead to these disconnects. And I hope I didn't interrupt anybody and make them forget what they wanted to say.
Well, I wonder if that kind of leads into one of the stories that I put on our log to discuss this week, which is this essay that was published on the Legal Evolution blog this week by Anuja Gillespie, talking about this question of whether the model rules of professional conduct should have an explicit duty of innovation built into them, not just the duty of tech confidence that we've talked about any number of times, but take that a step further and make it a duty of innovation, so that lawyers have a duty to be moving, not just technology innovation, but practice innovation, a duty to be moving things forward in some way. And she wrote an essay that's a very thought-provoking one. Put that in the link here in the chat. And she talked to several quote unquote experts. I say that in air quotes because I was one of the people she talked to about it. And she asked me what I thought about that, and I thought it was interesting because, I mean, as you start to read through the model rules of professional conduct, there's an argument to be made that there's already a duty to innovate, because, I mean, we lawyers have this duty to move the profession forward, move the justice system forward, to be zealous advocates on behalf of their client. And if you're not always looking to improve how you deliver services and what tools you're using to deliver those services, then are you really living up to your duty to serve your clients properly? Are you really zealously representing your clients if you're just always doing everything the same old? So there's no answers to that, but it's a really interesting issue, and it plays into this whole question of whether the business model inhibits innovation, and if so, do firms have some broader duty to, not just for business reasons or competitive reasons, but for even reasons of professional responsibility, to be trying to innovate how they deliver services?
Well, as much as I am all for lawyers innovating, and I think that that's like an ideal situation, I'm going to have to completely disagree with this whole line of this thesis, because I mean, for starters, how do you define innovation?
Man, you're bumming me out now.
But like, how do you define innovation? I would argue that it probably varies from person to person. And as much as I'm all about, like, for me, what tech competence means is lawyers understand the tech and they make educated decisions about whether to use it or not to use it in their practice, right? So, my mentor who recently passed away was this old school criminal defense attorney. He was fantastic. And I would argue that even up until the end of his life, he died a little early because he had cancer, but he was still handling cases right up until he retired, and 100% the old school way. But his clients in those criminal cases were getting the absolute best representation they possibly could, despite the fact that he was, using paper and, using computers simply to, probably draft motions, and that's it. I think that whether a lawyer or law firm uses technology, and the technology that they use varies 100% across the board, whether it's, you know, and it's going to vary depending on geographic region, practice area, methods they already have in place, how big the firm is, whether they already have a good client base, and whether they even need more clients, or whether what they're doing is perfectly fine. Like for some law firms and some lawyers, they don't need to use tech at all, I would suggest, and they're just as efficient and effective as they possibly could. Most somehow could use tech, and I think they all have an obligation to understand tech and make educated decisions about whether to use it. And that falls under competence. But innovate, I mean, I don't, you know, I mean, I'm using him as an example, but I don't think that he was doing anything that affected his anything ethical. Like he wasn't doing anything that violated ethics because he wasn't innovating. Or was he innovating because he was on top of all the, you know, the changes in criminal law and techniques and tactics and whatever? I mean, that's innovative, but it has nothing to do with tech. So I'm not sure. I think innovative is too broad of a concept, and I definitely don't think that that falls under our ethics.
Well, just to argue one point. I mean, one of the points I made in my essay was that, not in my essay, in my contribution to her essay, was that you look right in the preamble of the model rules, and one of the things it says is that the lawyer has a responsibility to, quote, seek improvement of the legal system, the administration of justice, and the quality of legal services. So doesn't seek improvement, I don't know, implicitly suggest, you know, make it better, innovate it in some way? I think you can read that into that.
The point that we already have some sort of duty to innovate sounds like some of the arguments that were made about technological competence is, why do we need to add that? Because we already have that, falls in the realm of competence. And it may very well do. You can certainly argue the point. But having added comment 8, you know, did increase sort of the attention and sensitivity to the entire technological innovation, and I think it was a good thing. It moved us forward in a lot of ways, and not the least of which is now we have some states requiring CLE on technology. So this may be a similar thing, although I think Nikki is right. It's sort of like the devil is in the details here. I mean, how do you say this in a way that would advance what it is we want to advance without it being, you know, sort of like, well, you know, it's a good thing.
Well, that's what they did with the duty of tech competence, right? I mean, the devil's in the details. They were not very explicit about what that means. But no, I 100% agree with you that they should, if anybody thought this was something viable, then it needs to be made explicit in the model rules. It's not enough to just say implicit in the model rules is some duty of innovation. You got to spell it out. I mean, it's tell people what you're saying and tell them again, and be as clear about it before they're going to hear you.
I mean,
You
listen,
know, it's a sad commentary, right? I mean, any other business that there is in the world, you know, they don't need to be told to innovate. We innovate, we make more money, everybody's happy, right? But the legal profession is, we have to debate whether we should be told to innovate and do better. I mean,
well, I can see like an ethics, like an attorney appearing at a hearing and being like, listen, I was innovative with my trust accounts. What's the problem here? You told me to be innovative, I innovated. You know, like, how are you going to define innovate?
Yeah.
Gotta be very careful there, I think.
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't know. Maybe another solution is just if there was a good, I don't know, like a directory of technology products that lawyers could look at and you know, see what's out there and what's on the landscape. Nikki, what do you think of that idea?
Are we leading? Was that a lead into my my article? Okay.
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe.
Well, so for my submission this week, I wrote, I suggested an article that I wrote, which sometimes we do. And in this case, it was my ABA journal article that was on, and if you don't read my column regularly, you may not know that what I write about each month is a different type of software. And I explain what it is, why lawyers might want to use it. Here's some tips in vetting or choosing the software. And then here are all your options in the market, whether it's standalone or built into some other software, typically like law practice management or document management software or legal billing software. So what I did last month, or was it this month? Last month, was write about legal tech directories. And my thinking was that I'm telling lawyers about all these different kinds of software, but then it's difficult to locate the software, a bunch of different types of software, and then narrow it down to which ones you're going to use. And one of the reasons it's so difficult is because search engine optimization has, in my opinion, sort of made it very difficult to locate things on the internet these days. There's a lot of money to be made in optimizing search. And so a lot of companies are making a lot of money by being at the top of search engine results. And one of the types of companies that are doing this are companies that provide software review and software options. So think like Capterra, I think there's one called Software Advice. And what they do is they just cover the gamut of all kinds of software you could ever think of. And then they provide like a rundown of the software, and they provide reviews, and they provide a description and comparisons. But the problem is that if you go into any legal technology category, for example, because that's the space we're in, they'll claim to be talking about practice management software or billing software or whatever the case may be. And there's like all sorts of random software thrown in there that clearly doesn't fall into that category, that and it just leads you completely down the wrong path. So it wastes a lot of your time. And then the other problem is that those reviews are becoming like Amazon reviews, right? Like once those reviews start to matter, and once those sites start to appear at the top of search results, those reviews matter for companies. And so then, I don't know, you can't always trust the reviews that you're getting, because it's not a person saying, oh, I think I want to randomly review this software. Typically those reviews have come in through some sort of other methodology or other impetus. So what I think it's really important for people searching for legal tech software to have some reliable directories that they can use that have been curated by people in the legal tech space that understand legal technology. And so that's what I tried to do in this column, was provide a number of directories that provide lawyers with that a stepping stone into the different categories of software. What I found as I was going through this is there were some legal tech directories that I was familiar with from years ago that have not been updated or just sort of abandoned. And then there were others that really did appear to be mostly just, you have to pay for your company to be featured, which I don't think is always useful. And but I tried to locate a variety of different directories that one way or another at least provided a good starting point. And some of them were really in depth, and others just had like really listings, but a bunch of accurate listings, at least of a category of software, is a helpful starting point too. So I went through and tried to find a handful of directories that I thought would be really useful for people searching for software. And that's what I pulled together in this article. And, I say this not because Bob's here, but Bob's, the one that he's rolled out as
I
part
can
of
leave if you like.
Huh?
I can leave if you'd like.
No, but I mean, it's a good, clearly you understand the industry, and I know you to be a highly ethical person. Like, you have a very high bar for your ethics. And so I know just from knowing that about you, that the directory, I knew when you said you're creating a directory, that would be a good directory. And it is a good directory because it really does provide a overview, and you have some transparency in terms of your partnerships as well, but it provides a great overview of the different categories, and it's coming from a source that is knowledgeable. And I think it's a really great place to start. And then there's other ones where I think you can cross compare. You can see, what do they have to say about it? What do they have listed? Is there something that might be missing? Because I think that nobody's going to have the perfect directory with everything in it in one location. So I think if you just pick one or two of the ones in my article as your starting point, it'll give you a place to get basic information about a category of software, basic information about the players. And then from there, you can reach out to a few companies or do additional research on those companies, and then narrow it down to just a few that you really want to do demos on. And you absolutely have to do the demos. I can't imagine buying software without taking advantage of the free demo that the company offers. And not just you, but any stakeholders that are going to be using the software in your firm absolutely have to try it out, make sure it works for them, and provide you with input that you actually listen to and take into account. But so that's what I wrote about, was directories. And I think it's a good resource, as is my column overall. I try to be very neutral and provide a really good overview in each of my columns about a specific type of software. So I think that that's a good starting point. And if you're narrow it down to a specific type of software, also try to find my column on that, because I think that'll give you a little more insight as well. So that's what I wrote about.
I think it was tremendously helpful column. And, whenever I do a lot of presentations to local bars and state bar, particularly here in Kentucky, and, there's always a group of people that will come up afterwards that say, I'm a practicing lawyer, have a small firm. And I mean, there's so much tech out there and I have no way of evaluating. I don't know where to go. I don't know who to turn to. I could call a vendor. And of course, they're going to tell me it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and I don't have time to do all this because I'm trying to make it early. So, I mean, would be a godsend to people like that. I'm make a point to mention it anytime I have a chance, because it is and it's an understandable problem. I mean, I can't keep track of all this crap either.
And I get emails all the time. I feel so bad for my colleagues out there trying to choose software. I get emails all the time in relation to one of my ABA journal columns, and they're like, just tell me, what should I pick? And I'm like, I can't do that. I can't tell. I don't know enough about your firm. I'm not a legal tech consultant. I've got some skin in the game, and so I always have a hard time, or, I try to guide them or send them to another, like they'll ask me about a category of software that wasn't in the column they read. And so I'll try and send them to a column I wrote or some other resource to help them kind of vet the market. But you can't, there's no way you can possibly just tell a lawyer that, asks you or emails you when you know nothing about their firm, nothing about their practice, nothing about their needs. And that's where tech consultants come in sometimes, and they can be really valuable. I mean, maybe that's
yeah. No, and not to bring back a story I talked about last week, but a thing that I really think the legal press does, the legal tech press does better than I think some people understand of what we do, is we can tell folks what's out there, as and the technicals of it till the cows come home. But what we really can't do is tell you what you need, but we can tell you the use cases and build for you as the lawyer end user what you might get excited about, and then you can get excited about it. I can't necessarily list everything, but if I see a good example is I wrote about Opus 2 this week, and they have a product that very specifically does white collar investigations, which is what I did as a practicing lawyer. And I was like, yeah, this is cool. This is what I would have wanted for this job. And I was able to write a story that hopefully a white collar lawyer somewhere reads and goes, oh yeah, that is for my use case. But what we do is build excitement among people for use cases. We can't dictate what they want. We can only lead them to it by saying, like, here, does this strike you as what you want?
Yeah, I think. Well, thanks. First of all, thanks for the mention of our site in your article, Nikki. But I think one of the problems also is even with the legal tech press, there's just not a lot of sort of in-depth information about products out there. I mean, so much of our reporting tends to be some new product coming on the market, and maybe we'll see a demo of it, or maybe play around with it a little bit as on our own and write something up quick about it. But I feel like there used to be many more, a greater availability of articles by practicing lawyers using these things in their practices and writing about them, and it's harder and harder to find that stuff. And I mean, the ABA publications do a great job of it, but it's relatively a trickle. I mean, ABA Law Practice Management magazine comes out not even 12 times a year. I forget what it is now, 6 times a year, 10 times a year, something like that. But I mean, they have maybe one article a magazine, so that's 10 articles a year or so. They're great articles, but there needs to be more of that. I mean, that's one of the things we're really working on trying to do with our directory, is to try and we're going to be creating a deeper article of those kinds of articles and resources, as well as the product listing, so there's more sort of practical guidance out there to help people understand what's out there.
That's a good point, Bob. I mean, and I struggle with that too, because, I will have a product demo and it looks great, but I have no idea, in an actual use case, whether this product will do what you say it's going to do or not, or how well it will do. Now, if you ask me about a product that I used when I was practicing law full time, yeah, I can talk a lot about that, but that's only a tiny sliver, and that's at this point rapidly becoming dated. So that we can't. I always feel like I have to say to people, in my articles, look, this is what they said it will do. I have no idea if it will do this or not. It looks like it might, but who knows?
Yeah, I'm using almost that exact phrasing often in my articles. It'll always be, not that this is what it does, but this is what the company says it does, and who knows? It remains to be seen whether it does. So,
and I can't remember the product it was, and I wouldn't name them if I could, but there was some product I remember once that I looked at, and it was like, it can do this cool thing, this cool thing, this cool thing. And it was a subject matter that I had practiced in. And I paused, it's like, those are all independently cool things, but there's never a scenario in which I would have done them in that order. It was just like the capabilities are all there, but it's just not my workflow. So I never would have been sold on it. And I fear a lot of times, especially when I cover areas I didn't practice, like transactional work, that I'm falling victim to that and being like, all the capabilities are there. I don't know if it's really your workflow.
Well, or that, I think we've said this before in the show, but you also, there are the products that come out that are products that are designed for use in an enterprise setting. I'm a solo practitioner. They can give me a review copy of it. I'm not going to learn a darn thing about it. It's not going to do anything. On it, practically speaking, they can't give me a review copy of it. So, I can log in and play around with my case and review my case or some time and billing software. But a lot of these applications that we write about are just certainly beyond my capability of using them or writing them in the setting that I'm working in. So, but, and yeah, the product watch column in the ABA Law Practice Manager. I used to write the product watch column in the ABA Law Practice, so I'm a big fan of it. But my point about that is just that I think it's 10 times a year. I forget how often their magazine comes out, but it's not that a huge library of stuff. But I wanted to get on, Steve, do you want to talk about your piece this week?
Yeah, so what if there was a very large business that provided consulting services to in-house legal departments and law firms, and one of the consulting services they provided was how to better use technology in the practice of law and control your costs of your outside legal spend and provide lots of advice. And it turns out there may be.
Good idea.
This is one of these stories that I don't get to say this very often, but I actually thought something like this might happen and said so, 3 or 4 years ago. I was at I think it was ALM, and there was a presentation by a couple of EY partners, the big accounting firm, talking about how they didn't want to reiterate many times, we're not going to practice law, but there's all these services that we could provide. And, we don't believe there are legal problems. There are only business problems with legal implications. And so afterwards, I had several conversations and with some people there said, EY will never get big time in this. They have this big auditing practice, and Sarbanes-Oxley prevents them providing consulting services to people they're auditing. It's a big conflict. They'll never give up the auditing services. And so I wrote this piece that said, well, that's all well and good, but what if one of these big accounting firms just split out their auditing services from their consulting services and form two separate businesses? And lo and behold, last week, EY announced that they are proposing to their partners to do exactly that, to spin off the auditing function into a completely separate business, and to spin off the consulting services probably into a public company. And while they didn't say this is to get us more into the legal world, I don't think they really had to. I mean, that while that's not the only reason they would do it, they are the accounting firms are rapidly getting more and more into providing the kind of consulting services from a business side that leads them into providing consulting services on the legal side, not necessarily with the practice of law. Although, as machine learning develops, AI is getting more sophisticated, automation is becoming more the norm. The line between what is a practice of law and what is not a practice of law is becoming, in my mind, a little blurry. So the kind of services that a big accounting firm could provide to big businesses in particular that had an impact on the practice of law is pretty significant, and they're untethered now from any sort of auditing prohibitions with respect to these businesses. I think we can see a lot of things done that were not done before, including, for example, advising clients on which law firms to hire for a particular matter, because they have the expertise to understand who's who in the business and who does what. And it's not a far cry from that to begin to see, to use a word we're familiar with, integrations between accounting firms and law firms for certain matters, as we've seen, I think, in the immigration space and maybe the patent space already. So I thought it was kind of a significant development that EY is going to go this route. They have to vote on it globally, which will take some time because they've got 24,000 partners. But I think it could certainly shake up the accounting world and could have some implications for us in the legal world, even if we never get a non-lawyer ownership of any business. The things that they could do in the background, EY could do in the background, is pretty significant. When I used to have a partner that would say, the thing you want to do with your clients in any big case is know what all the documents are, because then you're sort of indispensable. It's hard to replace that knowledge. And you apply that to here, it's knowing what the business of a client is makes you indispensable. And so you hear from general counsel all the time, I just wish my lawyers would know more about my business. It's hard for a lawyer to know more about the business because we're not business people, right? But when you move it over to the accounting side, you have the ability for these consulting accounting firms, if you will, to use their business acumen and knowledge to know about the business and provide business advice, which somehow impacts legal strategy, legal decisions, who to hire, how to handle, how to manage, what technology to use, how to monitor, how to budget, all these things. So I thought this is kind of to me, it was a pretty interesting development.
Yeah, and I mean, the United States is probably one of the only countries in the world in which EY isn't already practicing law. I don't know. Again, I think that's sort of a spin-off group, but all across the world, they have literal law practices as well, where they're engaged in providing legal advice as well as those other services. So, yeah, I mean, it sounds like this certainly could be a strategically smart move for them in terms of expanding their domain, and including here in the United States.
Yeah, I remember you had on your show a year or so ago. I can't remember the guy's name, but was maybe from Deloitte. And he was talking about the kind of services they are providing and want to provide in the legal space. And I remember thinking, this is quite remarkable what they seem to be wanting to do, and carving out this tiny little niche of practicing law, which now becomes just like a sliver of the whole thing that they're doing. And then they take that little sliver and just say, okay, we'll hire Bob Ambrogi for you. He's the best in the field, and we have this little deal with Bob. It's okay.
Right.
Well, this is what Richard Susskind's been talking about for years, right? Ever since the liberalization, as they call it over in the UK and elsewhere, is the Big Four is just been a huge competitor to lawyers and law firms. So it makes sense that they're trying to do everything they can within the bounds of what they can do here, and that they're starting to branch out. I'm sure that it has proven to be very profitable for them in other jurisdictions and countries. So I am not at all surprised. And now that they're seeing some fractures in the, ethical guidance and the rules in some of the jurisdictions, they're just trying to probably get the lay of the land and get their foot in the door, so that when the door really opens, they're already in place and ready to roll things out. So definitely
Yeah, and it may well be, Nikki, that they've sort of decided in the United States, at least, if we can do all these other things and get paid for all these other consulting things that we do that sort of touch on the law, and it only leaves this tiny little thing that the lawyers do, maybe we're happy with that, particularly if we can kind of control who's doing it, what lawyers are doing what, and how they're doing it. I mean, it does eliminate some big problems for you. You don't have to worry about malpractice. You don't have to worry these pesky little ethical things. I mean, you got a lot of stuff you can. So maybe they've just decided, let's do everything we can and kind of box the lawyers into this tiny little place that's called the practice, and they can have the little crumbs if they want to. We'll take the big piece of pie.
Yeah. One other story I just want to mention quickly before we run out of time is one I wrote about actually on Monday, which was this on Labor Day, which was this acquisition of vLex. And vLex is this legal research service that I think a lot of people haven't heard of, but it's really big on a global basis. They are kind of the largest international legal research service with legal resources from, I think it's over 100 countries, and growing at a rapid rate. They started out of Spain, well over a decade ago, and then acquired the UK legal publishing service, Justice, back in 2019, which brought in a sort of all the number of common law countries into their research database. They're not huge in the United States, but they're getting bigger and bigger, and they really only started coming into the U.S. market in 4 or 5 years ago. But they were acquired this week. Really, it was one private equity firm bought out another private equity firm's interest in it and took a majority ownership interest in it. But they are saying, watch us now. We're going to use this money to expand rapidly. Watch for us to be doing some acquisitions in the near future. So I think it's worth watching them, following them. I just did an interview with the guy who's not the CEO of the entire company, but the guy who's the head of their kind of legal group for most of North America and Europe and other parts of the world.
The CEO of our hearts,
Yeah,
not the real CEO, but
yeah, he's going to be on on my podcast on Monday or Tuesday or whenever we get around to posting it. But worth watching, and so I thought that was interesting. All right, we are at the top of the hour. Looks like it could be a big week next week. A lot of stuff happening. It's coming down the pike, it sounds like. So stay tuned for next Friday's show. We might have a lot to talk about. Or might not. Who knows? Until then, everybody have a great weekend and stay well. See you.
Wow.